Hi, I'm Devon. Welcome to West B. Stellar VBS will take kids on an adventure through space as they discover how Jesus shines his light to us and how we can shine that light to others. Stellar VBS will launch June the 19th through 23rd from 6 to 8:30 p.m. All completed BPK through 5th grade are welcome. Grown-ups, you don't have to miss out on the fun. We want you to join the kids on their stellar space journey. Visit bbs.westb.org to register your kids or to register to help. Don't forget to start inviting your friends and get ready for a journey you won't forget. Summer suppers begin on Wednesday, June the 7th at 6:15 p.m. Join us for a meal, lots of fun, and fellowship on Wednesday evenings during the summer. Cost is $5 per person, $20 family max. Children 5th grade and under eat for free. Check out the menu at menu.westb.org. Are you looking for more info on what's happening at West B? Make sure you subscribe to our newsletter. In addition to the weekly newsletter, you will receive our devotional newsletter that coincides with Pastor Sam's Sunday morning messages. Subscribe at newsletter.westb.org. Well, that's it for now. Let's worship together.
As I watched, the Lamb broke the first of the 7 seals on the scroll. Then I heard one of the 4 living beings say with a voice like thunder, "Come." I looked up and saw a white horse standing there. Its rider carried a bow, and a crown was placed on his head. He rode out to win many battles and gain the victory. When the Lamb broke the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living being say, "Come." Then another horse appeared, a red one. Its rider was given a mighty sword and the authority to take peace from the earth, and there was war and slaughter everywhere. When the Lamb broke the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living being say, "Come." I looked up and saw a black horse, and its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice from among the 4 living beings say, "A loaf of wheat bread or 3 loaves of barley will cost a day's pay, and don't waste the olive oil and wine." When the Lamb broke the 4th seal, I heard the 4th living being say, "Come." I looked up and saw a horse whose color was pale green. Its rider was named Death, and his companion was the grave. These 2 were given authority over 1/4 of the earth, to kill with the sword and famine and disease and wild animals. When the Lamb broke the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of all who had been martyred for the word of God and for being faithful in their testimony. They shouted to the Lord and said, "O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you judge the people who belong to this world and avenge our blood for what they have done to us?" Then a white robe was given to each of them, and they were told to rest a little longer until the full number of their brothers and sisters, their fellow servants of Jesus who were to be martyred, had joined them. I watched as the Lamb broke the 6th seal, and there was a great earthquake. The sun became as dark as black cloth, and the moon became as red as blood. Then the stars of the sky fell to the earth like green figs falling from a tree shaken by a strong wind. The sky was rolled up like a scroll, and all of the mountains and islands were moved from their places. Then everyone, the kings of the earth, the rulers, the generals, the wealthy, the powerful, and every slave and free person, all hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they cried to the mountains and the rocks, "Fall on us, and hide us from the face of the one who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to survive?"
Judgment is issued and received. Wrath is exercised and felt. We're going to be in Revelation chapter 6 today, so get those Bibles out. Follow along, please. Let's talk about this issue of judgment and wrath. Now, I lived by myself for 8 years, between the ages of 18 and 26. Every now and then I had some roommates off and on, but pretty much I had my own place and I lived by myself. I rarely, if ever, used a glass to drink milk. Why would I? It's my place. No one else lives there. Then I got married. Judgment was issued and received when my wife, Erin, caught me drinking out of the milk carton. I deserved it. Wrath was exercised and felt. I experienced it. And repentance followed. Never did it again. Now, that's a bit of a silly example, because what we're about to cover in Revelation 6, much more serious. But the principle's there. God has wrath. God issues judgment. Now, a little side note here. There are those who believe the rapture of the church occurs between Revelation 5 and 6. And as we go throughout this series, we'll discuss more about that later. But I thought I'd just throw that out there because there are many who do believe that. Starting in Revelation 4, John received his second vision. In Revelation 4, as we've been talking about in previous sermons, God the Father is sovereign over the universe. And in Revelation 5, we learn that God the Son, Jesus, redeems creation. And last week, we talked about how Jesus is this lion lamb, the God-man lion lamb, all-powerful, yes, but also the perfect sacrifice. Now, what is this scroll with 7 seals that we find in Revelation 5 and Revelation 6? The scroll is simply the plan for what transpires in the rest of Revelation, which, as we will see throughout the rest of this series, is a lot of judgment and salvation. Judgment, we see the symbols of seals and trumpets and bowls, and more to come on that later. Salvation being made available to all, to anyone, every tribe, language, people, and nation, as we learned last week in Revelation chapter 5, verse 9. Now, Revelation 6 presents a fantastic scene. There is this stark imagery. You might even say it's unsettling. Love what Billy Graham says about Revelation 5. He obviously preached this many, many years ago. He says, the shadows of all 4 horsemen can already be seen galloping throughout the world at this moment. And you think about that. And we'll talk about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse here in a moment, but it's unsettling. There is a coming judgment. And apart from Christ, we are under the wrath of God. Now, let's discuss God's judgment and wrath, because people do struggle with this, the fact that a loving God would have wrath. In John chapter 5, John's gospel, John 5, Jesus claims to be God and says, don't be surprised that he will judge, that righteousness will ultimately be rewarded, and that evil will ultimately be defeated. God's judgment is his plan to remedy all wrongs the world has experienced. There is disorder in this world, and God's plan ultimately is to remedy or reorder the disorder. And not just for you personally, although I hope that happens, but for the entire world. But God also absorbs judgment. Jesus becomes our propitiation. I know that's a big word, but he satisfies the judgment or the wrath of God. What would be for us is now taken by him. His holiness becomes our holiness. His righteousness becomes our righteousness. And the blood of the cross expunges the record of sin. So Jesus, let's think about this. Jesus makes you desire judgment and be willing to meet the judge, because Jesus is just and he is also justifier. God's wrath is an expression of his love for truth. Romans 1:18 says this, but God shows his anger from heaven against all sinful, wicked people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. For God to condemn simply means that he has standards. There are absolutes. There is absolute truth revealed in the Bible, and God holds us accountable to those absolutes. To understand this, we must know that anger and love are inseparable concepts. We struggle with the anger of God or the wrath of God. Everyone seems to like the love of God. They love God's love. But anger and love are inseparable concepts. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been angry because someone is destroying his or her life? This is somebody you love, somebody you know. They are doing this to themselves, and you're angry at them because they're destroying their own life. Of course, I'm sure most of you, if not all of you watching this, have had that emotion of anger. You would not love that person if you tolerated their abuse of themselves. Anger is not the opposite of love. The opposite of love is indifference, the fact that you just don't care. If you have anger, which in many cases you should, then how much more does God have anger? He is perfect, and our sin is an offense to him, and we are destroying ourselves with our sin, and that makes God angry. Not because he hates you, but because he loves you. Now, an extreme view of either God's love or wrath kind of warps the way that we live. If you were to say, well, I know only a loving God who always says yes to me, well, then you become selfish. You become like a spoiled child, and you don't know the true Father. Or if you would say, and people don't say this, but let's just view this through the extremes, I know only a wrathful God who always says no to me. Well, then you become a victim in many ways, an abused, victimized child. And in that case, you don't know the true Father. God has anger, exercises wrath, issues judgment, yes, but he does so because he has absolutes and because he loves you. Now, in Revelation 6, Jesus, the Lamb, breaks the 7 seals on the scroll. And what this shows us is how God is the one who is in control of history. God is the one who's culminating everything in the end of days. And we get this picture of 4 horsemen, which is an introduction to the first of God's 3 series of judgments. So the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are introducing a series of judgments. You have 7 seals, that's the first one, in chapters 6 through 8. We'll be talking more about that here in coming weeks. Then the 7 trumpets in chapters 8 through 11, and then lastly, the 7 bowls in chapters 15 and 16. So 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, and they all represent the judgment of God. Now, the big question here, and this is something that the scholars debate, but I think I'll give this to you. I think it's an important part of the text. Are these judgments simultaneous? Are they there's only 7? Just the first trumpet and bowl and seal all kind of align? Or are they consecutive, meaning are there 21 judgments? Are they telescopic? In this way, the 7th seal introduces the 7th trumpet, and then the 7th trumpet introduces the 7th bowl. Do they kind of build in that way? There's a lot to be said about that, and there's a lot of questions and some good scholarship around it. The key here is that there is an intensification of judgment as we near the end of days. So whatever your view is on each of these judgments, the bowls, the trumpets, the seals, and how there are 7 of each of them, and exactly how many judgments are there, the point is that this is a building thing all the way up to the point to when Christ will return. Now, Jesus prophesied about these days in Matthew chapter 24. In fact, Matthew chapter 24:21 says, "For there will be greater anguish than at any time since the world began, and it will never be so great again." So Jesus tells us, and there'll be plenty of other texts that we look at in future weeks where Jesus prophesies even more about the end of days. Now, as we walk through Revelation 6, I think it's important for us to kind of break down these 3 views again. So let me talk about amillennialism, postmillennialism, and premillennialism. Amillennialism, I'll be able to say that here in a second, says that we are living in this time now where there's suffering for the church and success for the church. Postmillennialism says that things will improve over time, that there will be less suffering and more influence for the church. And then premillennialism believes in a little more chronology in the text. This is where I stand, and I mentioned this in a previous sermon, and that the world will get worse until Christ returns. Now, within premillennialism, there are two prevailing views: the post-tribulation pre-mill view and the pre-trib pre-mill view. There's that mid-trib view, the mid-tribulation view that my wife holds to. Still a little confused about that one. Obviously, if you want to do a little more research around each of those views, I would encourage you to do so. We'll come back to a lot of what these views are in future sermons, but I at least want to give you a preview here to let you know I do teach from the pre-millennial view when I'm doing this series. Okay, who are the four horsemen of the apocalypse? What is happening here? Well, let's walk through each of these horses, if you will, these four horses. There's symbolism, and Revelation is filled with these symbols. So while I do take the text literally, I read it poetically. And in this way, Revelation is more, this part of Revelation in particular, is more like David's Psalms and the poetry there than, say, one of Paul's letters and kind of the explicit instructions that are there. So we need to read this poetically. I do take the text literally, but part of these descriptions is to help us understand through symbols. So the white horse is symbolic. And the white horse, we learn that deception will convince the world that evil is good and good is evil. The rider of the white horse is a false Christ. It's the opposite of Christ on a white horse in Revelation 19. So don't get those two things confused, because Christ will return on a white horse. This is a false Christ. The white here representing purity and righteousness. And here we see the forces of evil disguising themselves as righteous and true. Now, some believe the battles this rider wins are ones of military conquest. Likely, that's true. But I also believe these battles are ones of the mind as much as ones of might. Now, why do so many deceivers want to access our children? We're seeing a lot of this today because they believe that's where you can win the battle of the mind. In fact, if you look there in verse 2, it talks about this white horse and a crown placed on his head, rode out to win many battles and gain the victory. These many battles, happens. How would the powers of darkness win many battles? Well, you can win many more battles through the mind than you can through warfare. You can win many more battles through technology than you can tanks. And so I think the white horse represents a lot of what we see today already. It will only get worse, I believe, as the end of days nears. Then you have the red horse. The red horse here in Revelation 6 represents constant fear and how this fear will remove any semblance of trust. It says there in verse 4, the mighty sword takes peace from the earth. During World War II, Albert Einstein expressed regret about how his formula, E equals mc squared, had helped make the atomic bomb possible. And he was interacting with the photographer, and the photographer asked him, do you believe that there will ever be peace? And Einstein said, no. As long as there will be men, there will be wars. The red horse representing that constant fear. The black horse represents rampant inflation that will cause many to become impoverished. Something that, at least in the United States right now, we're seeing a little bit of. Verse 6 talks about how basic food items will become extraordinarily expensive. In the last year, we've all experienced the way inflation can put a pinch on people. I know our grocery bill is way up, but what's prophesied here is much, much worse than what we're experiencing right now. And people will get desperate. They will get desperate when they cannot feed their children. And this desperation will push the world into an all-out conflict. So the white horse claims our minds. The red horse claims our trust. The black horse claims our finances. And then ultimately, this fourth horse of the apocalypse, the pale green horse, claims our lives. And with the pale green horse, we see represented here, again symbolically, but these things literally will happen. Widespread death will prompt a global panic. In fact, in verse 8, it says approximately 1/4 of the global population is wiped out. In Revelation 8, at the sixth trumpet, another third dies. So here we have this sixth seal, and it indicates that there will also be great cosmic disturbances as well, earthquakes and meteorites hitting the earth. World leaders will retreat into bunkers, and even the wealthiest will not be able to hide. What's the point of all of this? The point is this: the most secure people will be undone by God's wrath. The wealthiest people and the greatest power brokers in this world are not immune. Now hear me, God is slow to anger, He is rich in mercy, and He wants to lavish His grace. But there will be a day when the holiness of God will respond to the persistent wickedness that we find on this earth. In fact, if you look at verse 17, it says, "For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to survive?" You can compare this to the prophecy of Joel, specifically Joel chapter 2, verse 11. The day of the Lord is an awesome, terrible thing. Who can possibly survive? Who can survive? You can. You can survive it. And we learn how here in Revelation 6. We see it in verse 9. There is an altar under heaven. Now, you won't be shielded from difficulties. Life, just because you're a Christian, doesn't mean that life is easy. You may even lose your life in service to Christ. But there is a white robe that awaits. Are you shielded from God's wrath? The people here cry out, "How long? How long?" It's the same cry in Psalm 94:3. "How long, O Lord? How long will the wicked be allowed to gloat?" It's the same cry we find in Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 2. "How long, O Lord, must I call for help?" God's delay is for those who don't know Christ. Why is God waiting? Because there's more to be saved. And so you have two choices: yield to the love of God and be changed by His grace, or come under the wrath of God. Judgment is coming. We know that very clearly from the book of Revelation, specifically today, Revelation chapter 6. Judgment is coming, but there is an altar in heaven that will shield you. It's time to get under that altar.